with Paddy Power. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Now then, you're welcome back. So you're going to have to bear with us this evening. We'll be jumping around a little bit. There are lots of people in demand. Marcella Mora-Igarahu will join us hopefully later on. She's jumping around the place, talking to different people. Tim Vickery, somehow we've got through to you. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Busy day, not for the greatest of reasons, obviously. You know, the BBC website, they asked me less than a month ago to prepare an obituary for Diego Maradona. Somewhat sad that it's been published so soon. Yeah,
60 is still so young.
Yeah, although there were many times when you didn't really think he was going to get that far. You know, it's and I actually think that some of his demise has to do with the lockdown. Because I think he needed the discipline. He needed the discipline of working. He needed the discipline of football. He was coach of Gimnasia down the wrong end of the Argentine First Division. You would have thought, well, why did he need that? Well, he needed it because it gave him discipline. And the Argentine league, it shut down in the middle of March, and it didn't start again until his 60th birthday, the 30th of October. And I think all those months he had with not enough to do, it seems that he was overindulging in alcohol, and I think he needed that discipline, and taking that discipline of work away from him has tipped him over the balance. Because
he was a man of excess. I mean, it's not just drugs, it's not just drink, it's not just food, it's not just his genius. Everything he turned his hand to was done with an excessiveness, and that is the story of his life in so many ways. Yeah, such a human figure. One of my favourite memories of him is him going to the stadium with his beloved Boca Juniors and taking his shirt off and swirling it around his head as he led the chanting. You know, not a lot of great former players are supporters to that extent, but he was very, very emotive and very human and very fallible, and a kind of mixture sometimes of hubris and self-pity, which I think is quite an Argentine mixture. But all of this made him so easy to relate to. What do we know about what happened today? Well, it seems that he suffered a heart attack, and ambulances were called to his house, but it was all too much, too little, too late. And he underwent a surgery on a blood clot in his brain just over 2 weeks ago. And the question there, and the surgery was a success, but the question there was, how would his body react? You know, he's put his body through a great deal on the 60 years on this planet, not just through his own will and volition. You've got to remember, when he played his football, there's a statistic that I like to bring out, that between the mid-70s and the mid-90s, the average distance covered by top-level footballers doubled. So there's a huge physical development of the game without, until after the 1990 World Cup, a corresponding rise in protection given by referees to skillful players. So Maradona was playing his football at a time when he was being kicked all over the place. And that too had a huge effect on his body, and he was pumping himself full of cortisone just in order to be able to be fit enough to take the field. So not all of his problems were self-inflicted. Some we have to blame the game of football for. Yes, there is no doubt he was strapped up and pushed out onto that field on numerous occasions. And just actually, it's funny you mentioned the physical treatment we were just mentioning before you came on. I mean, if any younger person wants to look up the Butcher of Bilbao and 1983, it's one of the reasons that makes it almost impossible to properly compare a Messi and a Maradona. They're playing a different sport. No doubt about it. Maradona, it annoys me when so many of my compatriots are so quick to label him a cheat. Because I can't think of anyone that I've seen who has been more brutally cheated against. And I think that inevitably is going to make you a little bit cynical. Just purely in terms of the hand of God goal against England in 1986. Well, the England defenders are kicking him all over the place, and there's Terry Fenwick shoving his elbow into the face of Maradona off the ball. Now, I rate myself a fairly stand-up moral kind of guy, but if people are doing that to me and I've got the chance of putting in a goal with my hand, let me tell you, Joe Molloy, I'm taking it. Yeah. There's a quote from Maradona: "I gave my opponents a big advantage. Do you know the player I could have been
if I hadn't taken drugs. And you know, it seems it started around 82 or so in Barcelona, and then in Naples just became a very serious problem, and obviously he served a ban later on. It is astonishing he managed to produce what he produced across the 80s given his lifestyle. Astonishing.
Yeah, although we're back to that issue, which is not just sportsmen, it's not just Maradona and George Best, it's so many people in the arts. It's Dylan Thomas, if you like. If you take that little bit of devil away, if you take the excess away, do you have the same footballer? Can you have the footballing genius without the little bits of excess here and there? It's a question that there's no possible answer to. The only real sensible answer is sit back and watch some of those moments that he gave us. I've never seen anyone in a World Cup produce what Maradona did in the decisive stages of the 1986 World Cup, when the World Cup was still the barometer, the outstanding barometer of football quality. What he did in that tournament was exceptional, and it is the high point. But it would be foolish to limit his career to that, because what he did with Napoli is off the scale of extraordinary, and indeed at all the clubs that he played for, up to and including Napoli, he's left outstanding memories. After that, his life is clearly out of control, and he's paying a price for what football has done to his body and what he has done to his body as well. All the limits were taken off him, and he was elevated to the status of a god, and that's not healthy for anyone. And living the aftermath of that 86 World Cup, I think, is a big part of the tragedy of Diego Maradona.
I was reading, Jonathan Wilson had written obituary as well, and Maradona was first mentioned in the national press at 11. I hadn't realised it was quite that young. I knew he made his debut at 16, and you forget the 6 years he had in Argentina before going to Barcelona as a 22-year-old. He did some magical things there. You know, you're seeing some clips, I'm sure everybody is today, of some of his performances from the ages of 16 to 22, and they're extraordinary. But from the age of 11, he was talked about in the national press, and, you know, Jonathan in that piece talked about how as a child, his teeth were worn down because his diet was largely stale bread. There was no electricity, no running water. We are talking poorest of the poor. To go from that kind of existence to probably indulgence from, you know, teenage years, I don't know how you get through that unscathed, probably.
Well, I don't think you do. There's always a price to pay. And how Maradona paid it. But I'm glad you're bringing up memories of his time a little bit longer with Argentinos Juniors, where he started, and then a short but very memorable time with Boca Juniors. Right early in his professional career, he was playing against Boca, and Boca had a high-profile character goalkeeper called Hugo Gatti, who said, you know, this Maradona, he's just a fat little kid. He's just an invention of the media. We don't fear him. After Maradona had put 4 goals past him that afternoon, Gatti felt somewhat differently about him.
Yes, I'll bet. Because Jonathan also made the point, you know, he's done a book recently on South American football, and I'm sure you'd have a sense of this as well, that Argentina in some respects is a new country. You know, there was a massive emigration.
Totally.
An emigration boom in the 20s, you know, so it's got a very disparate sense of what it is. Who are we? What's our history? We're all from all over Europe and around the world. And so football in that respect is one of the few uncomplicated uniting forces. You know, you can see how it's so central to Argentina, and then this god appears. I mean, it's probably very hard over here to get a sense of what that must be.
Exactly. You've got two. You've got tango, music, and you've got football.
Okay.
And tango comes from down up. You know, it starts in the brothels and goes up and becomes accepted in Paris. Football goes the other way. It's brought in by the Europeans, especially the British. So it comes in full of first world prestige. It's reinterpreted by the locals at a time, as you mentioned, of mass immigration. It binds them together, and it's reinterpreted into a more balletic game, ideal for the player with the low centre of gravity. And that reinterpretation leads to international triumphs and international recognition for a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of those things. And Maradona, you know, he's a mixture of poor Italian immigrants with indigenous American.
born on the wrong side of the tracks. It is what he did during his life is living out an Argentine fantasy, especially in that 90 minutes against England. And it's this background that makes that 90 minutes against England so important. For the English press, so much of it was about the war between the two countries just 4 years earlier. From the Argentine point of view, it goes so much deeper than that, because you're talking, Argentina was really an informal part of the British Empire. You know, the British had realised you didn't have to control a place militarily in order to hold sway. You just control the purse strings. So Argentina finds itself on the wrong end of this colonial relationship. And that first goal that he scores is the classic revenge of the people on the wrong end of the colonial relationship. All right, the English might have the formal power, but we're smarter. We can run rings round them. And then the second goal is a simpler declaration of, well, but we're better than they are. So it's the day on his performance in the semi-final against Belgium in a more important game was even better. But it's those 90 minutes against England, because it's against England, because he scored the 2 goals in the way that he scored the 2 goals. It's that game that is the defining moment of a career and of a life.
I suspect you saw the recent documentary on Maradona, which focused heavily.
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Okay.
I had a chat with the director before he started shooting it, but I haven't had a chance to see it. And as I understand it, it centres very much on his time with Napoli.
Yes.
And again, Napoli, so many of the poor immigrants to Argentina came from the southern region of Italy, and he identified with them and the discrimination that they felt at the hands of the more aristocratic north. He identified with that absolutely perfectly, in a way that he didn't identify with Barcelona. He didn't identify with the Barcelona, the Catalan struggle against Madrid, but instantly he seemed to get the thing of Naples, and that's something which I think helped inspire him to extraordinary heights, week after week after week, taking the field every time he's taking the field, never entirely sure if he's going to end up in the dressing room or in hospital.
It's a really brilliant piece of work, because you don't come away from it with any simple answers or any simple opinions on Maradona. You know, he is at one turn genius and joyful, and you see him in training just messing around and producing moments of genius, and your heart almost swells. And then your respect for his ability to produce it on those big stages, you're just in awe. And then, you know, that Mark Twain line about, well, fiction has to be believable. You're watching him hanging out with the mafia, and it's so openly, and it's incredible. And then equally, you're seeing crudeness on his part in a big way. You're seeing, you know, the rejection of some of his children and refusing to recognise them, and a lack of self-control, and on it goes. I mean, it's incredibly nuanced. There are no simple answers. But one of the points that somebody very close to him in the documentary makes is, there is Diego and there is Maradona. And trust me, Diego's a good guy, Maradona's not a good guy. That was how she had managed to kind of find a way to compartmentalise this very complicated picture born of the complicated circumstances.
I love a quote from a fellow who played for Argentina in the World Cups of '66 and '74, was captain when they couldn't qualify for 1970, Roberto Perfumo, who he made a comparison with the Roman Empire. He said Julius Caesar had someone walking behind him, reminding him, "You're only immortal. You're only immortal." Whereas Argentine society had tended to do the exact opposite to Diego Maradona. Remember, you're a god. Remember, you're a god. And as I think today's events have proved, he wasn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, how can you kind of encapsulate what he had as a player? Because, you know, we were chatting again earlier just before you came on, and one of the problems is that all of the adjectives you're going to reach for have been used about far lesser players. You know, majestic and excellent and beautiful dribbler, and, you know, his left foot was to die for, and all whatever cliche you want to go for. We use the same terms about lesser players. He was different stratosphere. He's in that grouping. I don't know how big that grouping is. It's 4 or 5 maybe, depending on your point of view, but he's in that grouping.
Well, let's go back to that second goal against England in '86, and let's remember that what he did running with the ball on that field was almost impossible. So there's extraordinary control of the ball there. Now, I'm sure you're a fan of Martin Scorsese's boxing film Raging Bull, and that you see many things there through the eyes of the great sportsman, in that case Jake LaMotta, in slow motion. And Maradona, while he's carving his way through the England defence, running with the ball tied to his feet, he's also seeing things in slow motion. There are so many things going through his head at that time. One of them is when he played against England at Wembley in '79, he did a similar dribble and came through at a similar angle, one-on-one with a goalkeeper who was Ray Clements, who just left us recently. And he went for the shot, and he just guided it just wide of the far post. And his brother said, "Why didn't you throw the dummy? Put the goalkeeper on the floor and go around the other side." And that's in his mind. As he's running through the England defence 7 years later, that's in his mind. Oh, yeah. So this time, I'll throw Shilton the dummy. Another thing is, as he's running, the centre-forward, Valdano, is trying to get up there in support to offer the square pass. And in the dressing room afterwards, Valdano says this to Maradona. "Yeah, I was making a move there." And Maradona said, "Yeah, I saw that. I thought about maybe giving it, no, but in the end, I thought, no, I'll do it my way." So while all these events are happening at breathtaking pace, he's computing all of this. He's, like some little squat little computer. He's totally in control of what's going on around him. And there's something else that we have to throw in, I think, because talent is never, ever enough. If you talk to people who play with Maradona, usually the love that they have for him is almost unconditional, because he wasn't showing off, doing his party pieces to thrill the crowd 60 yards from goal. He is putting all of his ability at the service of the collective. He was a team man. He was not a taker. He was a giver, and all of those things together, the talent with the ball, the mental capacity to be in control of what's around him, the understanding of the game. He's a strategist, and the willingness to give to the cause. I think all of those things are part of the extraordinary genius that was Diego Armando Maradona.
There's loads of texts in. It's great to hear Tim tonight. In 1986, I watched every game of the Mexico World Cup. I remember being obsessed as an 11-year-old at Maradona. In '88, I had the pleasure of watching him play and verbally abused at Wembley in a Rest of the World versus the English League. In 2010, I named my son after Maradona. Today, the greatest footballer of all time left us, says Glenn. I remember the goal against Greece in '94. It was a great moment in sport, a bit like Ben Johnson in Seoul '88. Illegal, but great, is a texter.
But I think that this is an interesting point, because it's not like Ben Johnson in a way that I will try and explain. And he shouldn't have played. He shouldn't have done it. He was. I remember seeing him on the bench when Argentina played Brazil just 3 months before that World Cup, and he was extraordinarily fat. You're thinking there's no way that this fella can play in a World Cup, and it wasn't really his desire. It's just they nearly failed to qualify. So the call went up: come back, please. We need you as the saviour. And he couldn't resist it. He couldn't resist the challenge, and what he did was take a shortcut to get his weight down. The difference between Ben Johnson and Maradona is, in the case of Ben Johnson, the drug is the performance. In the case of Maradona, the drug, far, far less severe offence, the drug gave him a platform from which to show his ability. So it annoys me when, and this is especially true amongst my compatriots, they're so quick to call Maradona a cheat. he shouldn't have done what he did in '94. He shouldn't have played, really. I mean, he tried to take a shortcut to make up for the fact that he really, you know, at that stage in his life, he wasn't in an athletic condition to do it. The cocaine thing is, well, that's, you know, some drugs are taken in a conscious attempt to improve performance. That's not the case with cocaine. That's an addiction, and I think it's entirely wrong that social drugs are put in the same category as performance enhancing drugs. But I can't ever remember seeing a player who was cheated against as much as Maradona was, because, you know, he was taking those cortisone injections for a reason. And that was that he was being kicked all over the place every game. But one of the things about him, he was so strong with that low center of gravity. He wasn't an easy player to kick. You know, you had to catch him to kick him, and that was difficult. And at that time, to be that good and to survive all of the violence that defenders were allowed to use against him, that really means that he was exceptional.
Yeah. Do you remember vividly watching '86? Did you hate Maradona?
No, I couldn't. I'd never been out of England, so you know, I was supporting the England team, but I was seeing what the England defenders were doing to him. So I could never hate him. I've got vivid memories of it because it's the moment when I fell in love with football all over again. You know, I was born in '65, and football, I was obsessed with it as a kid. But then when I got into adolescence, music and music and other things seemed more interesting. The '86 World Cup is the moment when I fell in love with it all over again. It's almost the start of what I ludicrously call my career. And just watching some of the things that he was doing, you know, I just can't understand how anyone who loves football cannot have love in their heart for Diego Maradona, and sadness for the tragic sides of the story, because there are so many of those. I mean, there's such an interesting comparison, I think, between his career and that of Pelé. Pelé's a very different character, totally different character. But the career of Pelé is the classic hero in 3 acts. You know, the hero appears, he's fantastic, he has some setbacks, and he comes back and triumphs in the end. The career of Maradona and the life of Maradona, it just weaves all over the place like some mazy dribble. And that makes him so human and so fascinating.
Lads, I was 16 in '86, was a football fanatic. What Maradona did in that World Cup was magical. It's one of the defining memories of my youth. I'm sure a lot of people of a similar age lost part of their youth with the passing of Diego today, the greatest player of the beautiful game, R.I.P. That chimes in perfectly with what you've just said. So you were drifting away into other areas, and maybe football isn't as expressive and wonderful as things like art and music, and then Maradona maybe opens you up to the possibilities.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So a huge part of my youth has gone today, but what a legacy it left. And this we could have been having this conversation 15 or 20 years ago. So at least he was able to have a few more years and have some pleasure from what he was doing, and for all of the pleasure that he gave to so many millions, how much he deserved that.
Yeah. I haven't been keeping track of the social distancing situation in Argentina, but I know it's about to happen over the next couple of days.
Yes, and well, we've just had some news in that Boca Juniors were supposed to be playing tonight in South America's Champions League, the Copa Libertadores. The game's been postponed. Now, I can't tell you just how extraordinary this is. Games in South America have been ploughing ahead under all circumstances. You know, teams are taking the field with the 20 players absent through coronavirus, and the game goes ahead. The calendar has clearly been drawn up in order to protect the continuity of the competitions.
Yeah.
But because of what's happened to Maradona and the commotion that there will be in Argentina, the 2 legs of Boca's game against Internacional of Brazil will now be in early December. So that really is testimony to the importance of the occasion.
That is something. Who would have to pass away in England, for instance, for the game to be cancelled, as opposed to a minute's silence?
Well, I suppose it would only be the Queen.
The Queen,
maybe.
That might be it. Yeah.
But you know, the Queen, it's because of what rank she holds. It's not because of her biography. So there is no one, I think, no comparable figure in British culture, and a lot of that has to do with the extraordinary importance of football in South American culture, the extraordinary and probably exaggerated importance that can be placed on this game in South American culture.
Tim, I suspect you're going to spend the next couple of days on the phone and doing interviews of this kind. So thanks so much for making time for us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.